Chapter 38. Being close to nature has altered my perspective. We are lucky in New Zealand in that the outdoors are never far away. We live amidst a stunning backdrop of coast and sea, rivers, lakes, forests and mountains that offer unlimited supplies of peace, tranquility and beauty. Spending time in nature has enabled me to see that my head fills up with whatever I feed to it, whatever I focus on. When I am in the fully active stages of depression and mental illness, I cannot control where my mind ranges. But when I am well, I do have a choice. When I feed my mind on the horrors of the modern world, especially via the television, it is easy to develop nameless, nagging fears, doubts and anxieties about things over which I have no control. Worrying about the collapse of society fueled by the apocalyptic images of violence and destruction in the media is naturally going to disturb me. Choosing instead to sit by the river and fill my senses with its flow naturally induces feelings of calm and a faith that everything will be okay. The year that I've spent writing this book and living without a television has produced more peace of mind than I've ever known. Recently, I listened to a radio program where the speaker was discussing how to build stress management techniques into your day. He said something that really stuck with me. He said that if a person couldn't find 10 minutes a day to go outside, then they needed to reprioritise their lives. It's not much to aim for, and I couldn't agree more. Getting outdoors has played a significant and special part in my recovery and that reconnection to the person that I really am. Not just through the natural antidepressant of being amongst nature's beauty and power, but also through the humility and recognising that we're all only here because the earth allows us to be, and she can always change your mind. Being in nature is elegant and grounding and provides us manics with much needed balance to our fast-paced and unrestrained mental energy. The environment takes us out of ourselves, even if just for a moment, and that moment is the precise point in which we find ourselves meditating and engaged with our spirit. In that is much healing, the medication of meditation. I discovered that there were two places I needed to start once I made the decision that I wanted to get off the roller coaster of mental illness. Firstly, I had to draw the line under my recent behaviour. I had to decide that the worst thing that could happen to me would be to become that unwell again. So I told myself that to the best of my ability I would do whatever it took to make sure this wouldn't happen. I began to measure every choice, every big and little decision, every action I took against this bottom line. Would what I wanted to do help me to stay well, or would it contribute to taking me down again? This kept things nice and simple, but very clear. It also placed the choices squarely in my hands. I could no longer blame others if things didn't go well for me. These were my decisions, and the consequences had to be mine also. I didn't have to get it right every time. In fact, some of my greatest learning has come from the things I've made mistakes or errors of judgment about. But I did have to start taking responsibility for myself. In short, I had to grow up. The second thing I needed to do was to learn about my early warning signs. Every episode of mental illness is preceded by warning signs. What were mine? If I could act at an earlier stage of the illness process, maybe I would have a better chance of arresting the slide. Identifying these recurrent patterns was the very beginning of gaining insight into the nature and behaviour of my mental illness. In the early days, I got some help from talking it through with the community psych nurse who continued to visit regularly. We talked about the more obvious things, like how starting to not sleep properly was a trigger and a warning sign. With regard to depression, if I was starting to cry a lot for no reason, or with the mania, if I was starting to have racing thoughts that felt out of control, these were important things to pay attention to. Over time, a deeper understanding came from sharing with others of a similar mind. For example, other bipolar sufferers understand well the seasonal fluctuations of mood disorders, typically lower in autumn and winter and higher in spring and summer. Symptoms of bipolar can be triggered at the beginning and cessation of daylight savings time as the light changes. In fact, anything affecting our biorhythms can flick the switch, such as overseas travel and crossing international date lines, or working night shifts. A lack of exposure to sunlight can impact on moods. In Northern Hemisphere countries, people with bipolar depressions are often advised to make use of ultraviolet light boxes, which they sit in front of for a certain amount of time each day. We are fortunate in New Zealand in that many regions have good sunshine hours. Sitting in the sun for even 10 minutes, especially on winter days, can make a difference. While such strategies may not impact on those in the acute phases of mental illness, they are simple components of effective stress management and a gateway to a more spiritually focused, meaningful life. You may not hear your counsellor or psychiatrist prescribing them, but they have their place. These are some of the things I have on my list of early warning signs. Sleep changes and disturbances. This is a big one. If I begin to have trouble sleeping, or I'm waking up at 3 in the morning, alert, mind racing, I know I need to pay attention. I refer to 3 a.m. as my witching hour. It's a hollow time to be lying in bed awake, wondering if you'll ever see sleep again that night. For 2 or 3 nights I might get away with this, but any more and I'm starting to spiral upward toward a high or worry myself into a low. Action needs to be taken, usually in the form of a temporary medication increase, combined with keeping things very low-key and reducing the stimulus in my environment, for example noise, computer and television screens, and drama. The quicker I pick up on the change and remedy it, the less medication I need to take to set it right. Emotional intensity. When I am deeply in my distress, which thankfully happens less and less these days, I need to move out of it quickly. This is the wellspring from which feelings of great despair and overwhelming grief manifest. It is not a safe place to dwell, as it leads to thoughts of suicide, self-harm, and self-medication. I possess the most wonderfully simple tool to deal with this, derived from a form of counselling called re-evaluation counselling, or RC. The strategy is called present timing. The purpose is to switch you from your emotional mind into your logical mind. What you do is refocus your attention from your grief onto a mental exercise which requires some concentration. For example, counting backwards out loud from 100, or naming all the things in the room that contain, say, the colour green. Count something visible to you, leaves on a pot plant, for example, or describe in detail the attributes of something you can see, for example, the patterns in the carpet. If you are still in severe distress, do it again. Just keep counting, keep concentrating until your mind makes that shift. This simple little mental trick can literally be a lifesaver. Racing thoughts. This is when I have all these different thoughts flying around in my head at the same time, all clamouring for attention. It gets really noisy up there and there'll be ideas coming thick and fast. I can practically feel them firing around my brain and it starts to hurt as the pace increases. If I let this go, within the space of a few days it can get out of hand. Again, I've learnt that the quicker I pick up on this, the less drastic the intervention required, and the sooner I get back on track. I used to be addicted to the thrill of this racing thought life, but now I find it relentlessly exhausting. I'm usually happy to medicate it into submission for a few days. The halts, HALTS. Am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, serious? Often looking after our mental health is as simple as tending to the basics. It's been important for me to get to know myself and my condition. After all, it's my mind, and if I don't take an interest, I don't see how I can expect anyone else to. And broken or not, the human mind is a riveting and intriguing entity. I'm happy to say that mine is no longer my mortal enemy. We have finally kissed and made up. To conclude this chapter, I want to share a piece of nautical guidance from a fellowship friend. His recipe for dealing with life on life's terms is one that often resonates in my thoughts. When the going is rough, I trim the sails and batten the hatches, and then I can ride out the storm.